Thank you so much for joining us for another edition of All Angles. I'm Dion Jax-Milo, and thanks for joining us for this special program because we are at the Ministry of Finance at Heroes Circle for a special interview with the Finance Minister, Dr. Nigel Clarke, who just yesterday had his opening budget presentation. Thank you so much for talking to us, Minister. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Dion. It's my pleasure to be here.
Starting right off with Ukraine, which is in the news right now. And of course, our students recently home from Ukraine, but there are other impacts that we're likely to see as a result of the Ukraine-Russia war. And you mentioned three of them. You spoke of the increases in energy and commodity prices. You spoke of supply chain disruptions as well as adverse financial flows. But you really didn't say a lot. You said the Jamaican economy is resilient and will weather this storm. And a little further on, you made mention of fuel prices. So like the speech right from January on put on, Minister. You just kind of added in these three paragraphs as a nod to what has been happening.
Well, the budget was tabled 6 weeks ago. That's a public fact. The Ukraine crisis, Dion, is important to put things into perspective from an economic point of view. Just on Saturday, the Saturday before my budget presentation yesterday, I was locked away with the senior economic planners from the government of Jamaica, both on the fiscal side and on the monetary side, looking at the potential impact of developments in Ukraine on the major macroeconomic variables. And we are, as I said, Jamaica is in a position to weather the storm. Those are the three channels through which we're likely to be affected. And I don't believe there is reason for alarm. We will ensure that we have provisions that the poor and vulnerable are protected from the worst effects of, or the worst potential effects of this crisis. But it's not as if like during COVID where we'd have seen world growth go negative. No one is expecting that. If world growth, for example, I don't remember exactly what it was, but if world GDP growth was projected at 3%, the Ukraine crisis could notch world growth down from, if it was 3, I'm just giving an example, from maybe 3 to 2.7. Okay, and that has an impact, but it's not an impact that is going to, in a material way, impact Jamaica.
If we look, though, at what's been happening with inflation, so we've already seen 4 interest rate hikes from the Bank of Jamaica, and effective February 21, we saw the most recent hike to 4%, which is the largest of the 4 we've seen in recent times, and that was before Russia invaded Ukraine with the kind of impacts that you've mentioned. So wouldn't you, I hear you on the resilience, but wouldn't you still need some kind of recasting of your assumptions?
So in our budget, we have, our budgeting process, we have a sensitivity analysis, and we've built in 4 potential hikes during the year. It may be the case that we could have hikes beyond even what our sensitivities made us provide for. But in the grand scheme of things, in the scheme of a $900 billion budget, right? The adjustments that would have to be made, again, and the adjustments that we've had to make in previous years are would not be material to the point of disturbing the macroeconomic instability. So you'll never in a budgeting process be able to get every single expenditure projection right on point. There will always be some envelope around a projection where you reasonably expect that variable to land during the course of the year.
The Jamaica Public Service put out a statement this afternoon, I don't know if you've seen it, saying they're worried about the impact of rising fuel prices because of the Russia-Ukraine war. And the Chief Financial Officer, Vernon Douglas, has called for a suspension of fuel and electricity sales tax to, quote, further ease the burden on consumers during this difficult time.
Yeah, well, the one thing though, Diane, I don't like to comment on things I haven't seen myself. You are reporting to me what someone said. I can get into difficulty if you report to me what someone said and I haven't seen it for myself. So as a policymaker and as a minister of government, I would prefer to have read that for myself and then to comment on it. I don't like to comment on you're telling me for the first time what someone else said.
Okay. You want me to show you the release? I have it on my phone.
Well, you can call me tomorrow and be on the headline. And I'll answer it for you once I've seen it for myself.
I'm pretty sure, though, that you would be hearing some kind of lobbying from the business sector. In other words, I hear you saying you haven't seen this specifically, but this wouldn't be out of character. This sounds reasonable. We're likely to hear, because we've heard the business sector already expressing concern about the likely impact. Is that something that you've taken into account?
Well, let's put it this way. What I've heard Petrodam say is that they have inventory of fuel, and I believe they said they have an inventory, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, of at least a month of fuel. That's a month of fuel that's not at the price yesterday. So let us see how things evolve. Our policy focus is always on protecting the poor and vulnerable. The expectation is that others would provide their own personal cushion, so to speak. But the poor and vulnerable members of the society, there is a public interest in protecting the poor and vulnerable members. And we have shown in the COVID crisis that we are capable and ready to come to the assistance of those in our society who are in need.
Speaking of fuel, you spent some time yesterday in your presentation on the call, well, I should say perhaps the consistent and persistent calls by the opposition for you to remove the hedge fund tax. Now, in one of his many calls, the opposition spokesman on energy, Philip Paulwell, said this particular statement was August 2021, but he's been making the same one for several years. I'm familiar with it. Yeah. I'm sure. He said this 5-year deception of collecting hedge fund tax at the pump and not using it for its intended purpose must stop, because it adds to the trust deficit of the citizenry in public administration. Plus, he said one has to be concerned about its impact on the price of petroleum to the end user, given that we saw a statement come out from Petrojam that we're seeing yet another big hike tomorrow. This is going to resonate with a lot of people. Your response in your presentation was that, look, the then government raised $6.4 billion in 2015, used $3.3 billion on the hedge. The rest went into the consolidated fund and then abandoned the hedge. So you're suggesting that really it was just a ruse to raise additional revenues for the consolidated fund. It kind of sounded like you're saying, well, you know, they did it so we can do it too.
Not really. I'm just pointing you to the facts, not how the facts have been interpreted or how some people want the facts to be interpreted. The fact of the matter is that Ministry Paper 3415, presented on the 12th day of March 2015 in the House of Parliament, stated that the Ministry of Finance under the leadership of Dr. Peter Phillips was concerned about the loss in revenues from prices of oil that were going down. Okay? That's in the Ministry paper. And that is the description attached to the revenue measure to add $7 per litre. And the Ministry paper also, and following the implementation of that tax, hedge contracts were purchased between April of 2015 and June of 2015 for approximately 8 million barrels of oil over an 18-month period. After June 2015, no further hedge contracts were entered into. The administration was in power for the rest of 2015 and at the beginning of 2016. The 8 million barrels of oil represented 1/3 of Jamaica's import over that 18-month period. And the amount spent was $3.3 billion out of the $6.4 billion. The $3.1 billion remained, all of it went into the consolidated fund. There was no separate fund, and the $3.1 billion was spent on other matters. There was a revenue problem, and the $3.1 billion served to plug that gap. Now, what we have said, and we have been transparent about it, we would have gone to the people of Jamaica in an election in 2020 with our platform of direct to indirect, where previously in 2017 we lifted the threshold of income tax such that 350,000 Jamaicans today do not pay income tax. And yes, we had raised certain indirect taxes to pay for that. But that's a give back of $30 billion per year to persons who ordinarily would have paid income tax. $30 billion times the 5 years since 2017 is $150 billion given back to the people of Jamaica. And in addition, we lowered, rather than reducing that hedge tax, we lowered GCT and gave back $14 billion a year to Jamaicans. And there have been 2 years gone since that time, 14 times 2, a give back of $28 billion. So when he's talking about the $3 billion that they spent on a hedge tax, and we must give back that $3 billion, we have given back $28 billion over 2 years, and a further $150 billion over 5 years. Now, that does not mean that we are not concerned about the prices of fuel. The price of fuel has risen dramatically in the last 12 months. But our proposal is, Dion, we've established a $2 billion fund to provide assistance to the people who need it, to the needy, to the vulnerable. Why should the man or the woman who drives, like you, Dion, the Prado and the Land Cruiser, right? Why should you get a relief?
Seen my car.
Why should the person driving a Benz who has the resources get a relief? Do you know how many liters it costs to fill a yacht? Wait, let me ask you a question. Do you know?
No, because I'm not in that income. I'm not in that income
So why should we give the yacht owner a break?
Because it has
let me just make this point. It up to 1,000 liters or 2,000 liters to fill up one of those boats you see underwater. 2,000 liters. Why should the government of Jamaica use taxpayers' money to give the yacht owner a break? The better way to do it is direct and targeted to the people who need it. $2 billion directly to the people who need it. The government is not here to subsidize the Benz and the Prado and the Land Cruiser and the yacht and the ocean.
I'm going to come back to that point right after the break. Stay with us. You're watching All Angles. Remember, our hashtag is TVJ All Angles. We're back in a moment.